All right, so today I'll be presenting on the patient experience with and the perception of a community pharmacy-based program aimed at prevention of opioid-related harms. And this is also known as 1Rx in the community pharmacy. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with 1Rx, it is a training program used in North Dakota that's designed to give community pharmacists tools to partner with their patients and communities to help reduce burden of opioid misuse and overdose. So the goal of 1Rx is just to prevent opioid-related harms by using screening tools and assessments to assess patient-specific risk factors associated with opioid misuse and accidental overdose. So as patients go through the screening process at the community pharmacy, they're asked about family history of addiction, personal history of addiction, comorbidities that they have, as well as other medications that they take. The pharmacists use this information to stratify what their risk is for opioid-related harms. And then based on this risk, they can offer them different interventions that are in those gray boxes up under the background. And we just wanted to assess the patient's experience with this process because it not only allows us to monitor the quality and effectiveness of programs like this, as well as discover new areas that can be improved, but then it also helps us further understand specific aspects of programs that patients themselves find acceptable and beneficial. So the objective of our study was just to improve our understanding of the patient experience with 1Rx, and then any impact that patients had from the screening process and then the interventions offered by pharmacists. So to complete this survey, the patients were given a postcard along with their opioid prescription after they go through the 1Rx process. This postcard has a link to a survey that we created that is meant to assess their experience overall with the 1Rx process. So prior to completing the survey, once the patient follows that survey link, online, they're given just brief background on opioids and the 1Rx process. So in that yellow box there, that's kind of the language that we use on the survey, just to make sure patients have a good understanding, basic understanding of what opioids are, as well as the 1Rx process, because even though they went through the process, they might not know the terms necessarily that are used. So moving on to our survey method, we ourselves as the research team developed the actual survey itself. So it hasn't been previously validated or used in other research. So that just has to be taken into account when looking at our results. It's completed online via Qualtrics, and it does include 7 questions that are rated on a 5-point Likert scale. 1 free response question, and then just basic demographic data that we look for. So just patients identifying if they live in an urban or a rural area in North Dakota. Urban is basically just defined as our major cities throughout North Dakota, and then rural would be any areas outside of that. So moving into our results, looking at patient demographic data, pretty good split between urban versus rural patients, more urban, but also a good representation of rural as well. So moving on to that table 1, looking at the free response questions, we did pull out a few themes that we saw from a couple of the free response questions that we received from patients. So the first theme is that patients perceive 1Rx as fulfilling an unmet need in their community. So it's some examples of saying this is a good program that addresses something pressing. Another patient speaking about how it's important to help with addiction and then help save lives as well. Second theme with this was that patients perceived that the screening was quick and convenient. So you can see a lot of examples of different comments about how fast the process was. It was a good service and it was easy to complete. A few minor negative themes that I just wanted to point out. Out of our free response questions, we really didn't have too many negative comments, but I just wanted to point them out because they were there. So one patient talked about how they felt that the process was intrusive. Just because it does ask about some sensitive topics. And then the second example that I have on there kind of relates to maybe someone with chronic pain or severe acute pain, maybe feeling like with all of these new opioid programs in place that they aren't getting the medications they need, or that they have to go through more steps to get those medications. So again, not huge themes that we're seeing from the survey, but just maybe areas that we can look at for 1Rx to improve education on why we're doing this opioid screening and the safety that's associated with it. So moving on to the results in table 2 of our actual study, or the actual survey questions. So it looking at those, patients rated them as on a Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And just to explain that mean rating score, strongly disagree equates with a score of 1, and then strongly agree equates with a score of 5. So it looks like a majority of the patients were comfortable providing that information needed for the screening process to their pharmacist. They felt that the process took an appropriate amount of time, and then they also felt safer when their pharmacist checked their risk for bad effects from opioids. Moving on to some of the questions where patients were a little bit more neutral on was that they learned something new about their opioid, that their behavior changed, and that their attitude changed towards opioids. However, when we look at those 3 questions, questions 4 through 6, more patients strongly agreed with those statements versus those that did not agree or strongly disagreed. And then looking at question 7 with the overall satisfaction, 82% of the patients that participated were overall satisfied with the process. So in conclusion, patients were basically overall comfortable with providing their personal information to pharmacists for the screening purpose. They felt safer when their pharmacist screened them for bad side effects from opioids. They felt the screening took an appropriate amount of time and that they learned something new about their opioid. And then overall, they were just satisfied with the screening process in place at their community pharmacy. So with these results, we can use this to support a positive patient experience or perception of a screening process in their community pharmacy, and then hopefully apply it to future approaches for pharmacists conducted screenings in the future, as well as finding new areas where we can maybe improve and fine tune the 1Rx process itself as well. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions for me or the rest of the research team, or wants a copy of the PDF as well, you can just send me an email at sarah.chase@ndsu.edu. Thank you.